Welcome back, everybody. This is Annalisa Durr with Journey to the Goddess TV, and I'm back for the second part of my conversation with Dr. Mala Setty on her talk, Devī, the Archetype of Life.
Welcome back, everybody. And again, thank you, Anna, for inviting me to present Devī, the Archetype of Life. So in the first part of the presentation, we saw Devī from an archetypal and historic perspective. And now we move on to a special facet of her, and that is Lakshmi. And before we move on to the slides that I'd like to share with you on Lakshmi, I will start my presentation again with an invocation to the goddess and to our learning. Om. Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, everyone. So in this part of the lecture, I'll be talking about that special fractal of archetypal psyche that's related to human living networks. And that part of the fractal, archetypal fractal of psyche, can best be explored through the mythos of Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, well-being, and abundance. This is an image of Devī in general. And here's an image of Lakshmi. The way you know this is Lakshmi is she's sitting on a pink lotus. She has a vessel of gold coins pouring out. With her lower right hand, she holds the Abhaya Mudra or the blessing mudra. And her lower left hand is in the Varada Mudra, which is a giving mudra. And here, both of the rear hands, she's holding lotuses again. So she's a goddess of wealth. Clearly, this shows here in this image. She's a goddess of abundance. That's also shown here in this image. In the context of well-being, we have to think of wealth not just in terms of gold and money, as this image shows, but in all aspects of life. And not just personal well-being, but also the well-being of all the networks in which we are contextualized. So from that perspective, since life happens to us in the context of a home and a household, we will look at the networks of life from the context of different levels of households. The term for household in Greek is Oikos. So both the word ecology and the word economy comes from the root oikos. Ecology is the science of the household, and economy is the management of the household. So from the perspective of human systems, ecology is related to the earth and all the life systems in the earth, while economy is more related to our culture, where human beings are somewhat different from other living beings. They have this thing called culture. They're not fully driven by just their natural biology. And then there's a context of family and home. When I use the term family here and home, I mean the little networks that we each of us live in. So these three buckets are going to be explored through three facets of Lakshmi. Lakshmi as Śrī-Devī. Śrī-Devī is in the context of cultural artifacts. Lakshmi as Bhū-Devī is in the context of ecology. And Lakshmi as Grha-Lakshmī. Remember, the word Grha means home. And we had seen that earlier, where the interior of the temple, where the deity is kept, is called Garbhagriha, the womb home. So this context of home and the immediate networks of familial type of relationships, not necessarily biological, but the close relationships that we form in our little human networks will be explored in the context of Grha-Lakshmī. So Śrī-Lakshmī or Śrī-Devī or just the goddess Śrī has, again, as I had pointed out earlier, very, very deep roots in the Indic culture. The earliest we know of her is from the Vedas. There is something called the Śrī-Suktam in the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda is the oldest of the 4 Vedas. And currently it is dated as being between 1700 and 1100 BCE. But there is the thought that the Vedas are as old as humanity. And the Vedas have been handed over through an oral culture, and they were written down much, much later. So those oral cultures, that knowledge that is embodied in the Vedas, are seen as being as old as human consciousness. And in the context of human artifacts, the oldest art is in the petroglyphs and cave paintings in France. That's dated around 40,000 BCE. And the oldest poem in the world, the oldest poetry in the world is the Vedas. So if you think it is as old as human consciousness, we can basically say that the earliest forms of images, the oldest mythos in terms of creation of mythos in art, poetry, it has those deep old roots that go back like 40 millennia or more. So the Vedic Śrī-Suktam is a paean for the goddess Śrī. And later on, more evidence of Lakshmi comes to us in this image. It's a terracotta image of Lakshmi. It's about 3rd century BCE. And there again, we see the lotus symbol here. There's the pot. Only here, that pot, she's not holding it. The lotuses are stemming from the pot, and she's being showered by water that the elephants are holding. Again, think of it in all of these images in terms of Shakti. Shakti as symbolized by the flow of water. Shakti as that energy that permeates all of life, that engenders life. And lotuses in a pond in which fish are swimming, all these life forms thriving together. That is Lakshmi. And today, this is terracotta pots in today's India. And you can see it's the same design with the rounded body and the open and the lip. This is very unique to the Indian civilization. No, none of the other civilizations around the world have this kind of pots with these open lips, the bent lip, which helps in pouring. These are a set of images from my own background. This is a copper plate with Lakshmi and her 8 forms. Ashta-Lakshmi means 8 forms of Lakshmi. Ashta means 8 differentiated aspects of Lakshmi. And here's the Śrī Yantra or the Śrī Chakra, and they're both printed side by side on this copper plate. I got this from my mother, and I don't know where she got it from. So I don't know exactly how old this is. But this is something she worshipped in our home growing up. And now it is in my home, in my sacred space, in my home. Here's another image of Lakshmi. This is a calendar print. And here are her 8 forms. Again, she's differentiated in 8 aspects of life, which I have kind of bundled into the 3 households. And here she is with her complementary consort, Visnu. And this is an image of the Śrī Yantra. It looks small, but it's actually also a print of this size. And again, this is something I inherited from my mom. I took a photograph of it and I've edited it. So we'll go into the first household, and that is the ecological household, the ecological network of energies that is embodied in the mythos of Bhū-Devī. When we look at that special sphere where life exists, and that is the biosphere, we can see that it's a unique combination of air, water, and earth, and rock. Litho means rock. Neolith, Paleolith. Neolith is new stone, Paleolith is old stone. So the combination of stone, water, and atmosphere, these agents all come together and life forms came into being. So life on this biosphere is 4.1 billion years old. And the various ingredients coming together and forming that right combination of factors, be it nitrogen, carbon, oxygen from the air, solar energy, the water that is required for life, and the earliest forms of life were formed in water. Then slowly we had life in the lithosphere as well. So this combination of agents where the biosphere became a mature network of life is about 3.5 billion years old. This very, very ancient shell in which life exists, all these various life forms exist, is just about 5 miles into the air and another 5 to 6 miles into the ground. So it's just a shell that envelopes a core that cannot support life, and that is surrounded by the vaster cosmic energies and the earth energies, again, in which life cannot exist. Even there are parts of the hydrosphere where life cannot exist because there isn't enough energy, solar energy, that permeates, or the conditions are not right. This 5 to 6, 10 to 12 miles of a shell that forms like a network on which life forms live. And all these have evolved together in a symbiotic way through various geochemical and geobiological interactions. That very idea is also encompassed in the idea of the Greek goddess, Mother Earth. The Greeks imagined her as Gaia. And here's a modern image of Gaia. And clearly, we are anthropomorphizing this and we are giving it a feminine quality. But that is again coming from our perspective. We come from a mother's body and we project motherhood onto everything that nurtures us. We have come from a mother's body and we have been nurtured by a mother. And clearly, the mother is contextualized in the context of parenthood. It's not necessary that it's only a woman who parents us. That kind of projection of nurturance and benevolence is what is going on here when we think of Bhū-Devī. So interestingly, in Hindu mythology, Bhū-Devī is given the image of a milch cow. A milch cow is a cow that is still able to give milk and therefore is able to feed its calves. And here is that milch cow. But the milch cow is contextualized in this body of water, and this network of lotuses, lotus buds, lotus leaves is that network of life. And here is an image of the cow. But then this cow has Lakshmi's handprints. And you see that handprint here also on cow dung patties. And the patties are made out of cow dung and they're plastered on walls. And then when the patty dries up, those patties are collected. They're used as fuel in India. And do you remember we saw those big ash mounds in the Neolithic Sanganakallu area? You can just multiply these dry cow dung being burnt like that over acres, over centuries, over millennia, possibly. Here's a beautiful image of a woman making the cow dung patties. Why cow dung? Interestingly, in the Śrī Suktam, one of the epithets of Lakshmi, where she's eulogized with these various other epithets, one of the epithets is Karishini. The word Karishini means cow dung. Why cow dung? So it turns out that for this combination of atmosphere, lithosphere, and hydrosphere to come together and for that earth to become fertile, to allow plants to grow, you need a level of microbial activity. The cow dung has apparently, like in 1 milligram or 1 cc of cow dung, has nearly 300 to 500 million bacteria. So that microbial activity, along with geochemical and other geobiological activities, is what makes arid earth into fertile earth. And various human cultures have figured out that. It's just that it is kind of made much more graphic here in attributing to Lakshmi, the goddess of life, giving her the name of cow dung, eulogizing her as the goddess who lives in cow dung, and also the goddess who lives in the cow, which gives us a cow dung, and seeing Bhū-Devī, imagining her as a milch cow. I'll be covering the biological role of the cow and cow-like animals, which are under a class called ruminants, much more in detail later on in my presentation, because it's very important to look at what makes life happen. Always let us remember that archetypal energies are related to life. We can't just leave them at the level of the subtle body. We have to see them as being meaningful at the level of the material body. Here is a statue of Kāmadhenu on Amazon. It's a paper mache statue, and there is the baby cow. We are the babies. All life forms are the babies, are the calves. And the milk that we live on is the Shakti in the form of that life energy that is available to us. And here in this image of Kāmadhenu, all the deities are here. There's Lakshmi's handprints, but all the other deities are here. Just like we saw in that earlier image of Adi Parashakti, where all the gods and goddesses are in that one divinity. Here again, here is the bodiness of the earth, and it is permeated by all the archetypal energies that fuel psyche. Here's a modern day cow and a calf in India. Just very similar, but this is in a home, and you can imagine that this little family that takes care of this cow and calf, they might be subsistence farmers. For them, the benefit of the cow is very real. They would be using the cow dung for fuel, cow dung as manure. They would be using the milk in their homes for food. Indian cows, at least the local brands, are like other even African varieties of the cow. They have what is known as a A2 protein. That A2 protein mutated later in some European breeds into A1. And now we know that A2 protein is much more beneficial to the body and to other life forms, to us as well. Apparently, it actually gives a better way for our bodies to maintain their ability to fight disease. A2 milk is also the mother's milk. So in India, as many people must have done in all these centuries, if the mother's milk is not available, they would have given cow's milk to the baby. Now, if the best substitute for mother's milk, if you want to use milk, is the A2 milk. And you can find A2 milk being sold in Costco and all that. And A2 milk products like A2 butter, A2 yogurt. Now we'll move on to Śrī-Devī, where we will look at Lakshmi in the context of human systems which are embedded in ecological systems. Why do we have this a kind of a separate household called this socioeconomic network, which I'm attributing to Śrī-Devī? And that's because human beings are the only species that seem to have a certain amount of energy that is not dictated by nature. It is clearly at their disposal, and they have used it to build homes, to build artifacts, to create knowledge. But it has allowed them also to adapt to a variety of ecosystems. The human species is the only species that has such a wide spread around the world, where we can live in extremely cold places like the Arctic to extremely warm and arid places like the Sahara, and all levels in between. And that is because we have a certain energy at our disposal to create cultural artifacts that allow us to adapt to local conditions. So this socio-economic network clearly is first based on food, agriculture, and of course, shelter. And food and agriculture we know is as old as Neolithic times. In this network is also craftsmanship. Human beings have created stone-based crafts, tools, pottery, textiles, and homes, architecture, then of course images, creating sacred spaces, all the way to creating modern day books, computers, even in this kind of thing that we now are using, this virtual way of learning. All this is at some level human craftsmanship, and we use it to maintain our knowledge systems. The world of economics is also related to the world of knowledge. It's related to creating what we would call capital. Capital is just things that we can trade, whether it is capital as in actual money, wealth, but even things that we create can be seen as capital that we can use to trade for other things that we have access to get things that we don't have. So this kind of trade and artisanship actually predates Homo sapiens. Homo sapien is just about 500,000 years old. About 0.8 to 0.3 million years ago is when Homo sapiens came about. But Homo habilis is 2.5 million years ago. And we have enough data to see that Homo habilis were creating things and trading them among different groups. So trade networks, be it water routes or be it land-based routes, are very, very, very old. And they predate the creation of money by several millennia, centuries. Śrī-Devī, in that context, that archetypal energy of Śrī-Devī is again very old, very varied, and has been continuously manifesting in various cultures in various ways, continues to evolve. I'm using the term semantic networks here from a slightly different frame. The word semantics means meaning. Our culture is encoded in semantic networks. Semantic networks are ways of living. They use symbols, they have knowledge systems, and they are also alive. The term for Lakshmi, the energy rather that she embodies, is Artha in the Hindu context. Artha means wealth, but it also means meaning. It's meaningful wealth. So when we study cultures or we study the imagos that a certain culture has created of a certain types of archetypal energies, then we have to see it in the context of their semantic networks. For example, take an elephant. And we do not see elephants. They're not endemic to America. You would not necessarily find it in our semantic networks. Or even if you did, it would have a different connotation. But in the context of South Asia or cultures in Southeast Asia or Africa, where the elephant is endemic, then you'd have to see how the elephant was used in their culture. It is used to log forests. The elephants, because they're very strong, they are very good for taking logs out of a forest without clear cutting the forest. That way, the elephants symbolize meaningful economic wealth. But then because they're strong, they're also associated with Lakshmi, because she carries with her that kind of very strong Shakti that we see that now flows into various aspects of our life. It's also known that elephants are very motherly. They are herd creatures, just like us, we live in groups. But they also take care of young that are orphaned. They don't abandon them. From that context, they would symbolize that very special motherly quality of Shakti, of Lakshmi. So here's just a semantic network from tourist information of India, and here's a semantic network of images, again, tourist information from Vietnam. You can see how there's a lotus here, and there's a lotus here, and there's a bamboo here, but there's no bamboo here. There's a certain kind of hat that they would have worn that is especially useful when they work on rice paddies. Again, food. Here's a lot of seafood here, but here you do not. In India, especially, vegetarianism is very prevalent. So you don't necessarily see meals that always have some meat or seafood. Again, semantic networks like ecologies and ecosystems have to be understood from the perspective of where that life happens. What do these images mean to them? For that, we really have to do deep investigations. It is very easy to project our own understandings on these semantic networks. As those of us who investigate imagos and archetypal energies and how they play out in culture and how they have played out in history, we have to be careful about not transposing one onto the other. It is very easy to do that, especially with cultures that are not living. Because those cultures, let's say the Egyptian culture or the Mesopotamian culture or the ancient Greco-Roman cultures, they're not there to speak for themselves. And we don't always understand the artifacts they have left for us, what it would have meant to them. Any knowledge system we create, any kind of ecosystem of knowledge we create, should be open and tentative. I pulled this graphic out from Carl Jung's Red Book. It's Folio 165. It's one of the last graphics in the Red Book. And that luminosity of knowledge is well captured here. Anyway, this is the way I understand it. I do not know what he was thinking when he created it. But you can see how our immediate forebearers who have contributed to our culture and our knowledge systems. We are more conscious of that. But they themselves stand on the shoulders of earlier humans, going all the way to prehistory and the earliest forms of hominids, primates. But he's trying to capture that. Those archetypal energies have evolved, and culture itself that we now know as culture, we stand on the shoulders of many millennia of human culture formation. I feel that this graphic keeps us humble and grateful. This is the mother that has nurtured us. Now we move on to Grha-Lakshmī, the fractal of the home. And again, home means different things to different people. We are just looking at the archetype of the home to understand our immediate networks that nurture us. The abundance of the home. I'm just showing a few images from the Hindu context and how it is related to Lakshmi. Lakshmi is seen as being alive in the home, and especially alive at the front door, which is often decorated with rangoli patterns to welcome her. And on special festival days, the front of the home is actually decorated with footprints of Lakshmi. And there's kumkum and there's turmeric. And as I had told earlier, kumkum is made by mixing turmeric with calcium carbonate or lime. For those of us who know alchemy, we know that albedo leads to the yellowness of energy, and that in turn leads to rubedo, which is symbolized by redness. That flow of energy as it is flowing out, as the unconscious is becoming conscious, goes from black to white to yellows to green and then red. Those qualities of Shakti can be seen here. And often these footprints are painted as leading from the outside and crossing the threshold and into the household. There is a family greeting at the threshold of the household, and the threshold has been decorated with flowers and leaves. Here it's a family of 3 generations, not uncommon in the Indian context. Multiple generations do live together, and Lakshmi is especially seen as being alive in the kitchen, in the stove, in the pot, and in the food that has been cooked. Rice is a symbol of Lakshmi. Cooked food is a symbol of Lakshmi. It symbolizes plenty, it symbolizes nutrition, it symbolizes growth and nurturance. And Lakshmi is especially seen as being alive in the women of the household, the mother, the grandmother, and the potential of life that will come to bloom once this girl child becomes a woman, capable of giving life on her own. So all these confluence of images in the context of a traditional Indian home. I purposely chose this spot. It's not too many people use a stove like this that is probably fueled with cow dung cakes and firewood, and they cook in terracotta pots. But I just wanted to give you a sense of that continuity. We saw these pots in prehistoric and in the early historic eras of the Indic cultures, and there's a sense of continuity there. And clearly we've seen Lakshmi holding this kind of a pot from which gold is flowing, life energy is flowing. Another aspect of Grha-Lakshmī is the Tulsi plant. Just like how we had seen earlier that open-air temple where there was the neem tree and another tree near the Naga stone. Again, there are specific plants that are associated with the goddess. And with Lakshmi, it is Tulasi, or it's also called the holy basil, or Ausimum sanctum is the botanical name. And here is a little girl watering the Tulsi plant. Again, here's a pot, only this one, it's made of copper. And here is a woman going on a pilgrimage, or probably just going from her home to the temple. I don't know what vow she has taken, but here's a little portable, this is called Brindavan. This is a special square-shaped pot. And she's carrying the little Brindavan, and there's a Tulsi in it. But here, the Tulsi is the goddess. The plant is the goddess. And just as she is taking this to fulfill a vow or some celebration, in a typical home, the Tulsi is worshipped every day. It's part of the daily ritual of sensing Lakshmi's presence in your home through a living plant. The thing is, the holy basil has tremendous health-giving properties. I cannot go into that health properties of the holy basil here. I just want you to know that when plants are worshipped, they often are related to good health or the well-being of the home or the family or the environment. In this particular image, I wanted to just bring out again the play of Rangoli in the home. Here, the exterior of the home, clearly the home has some kind of a mud adobe type of surface, and it's been coated with cow dung paste. And when cow dung paste dries, it dries into this kind of a ochre color. That is the preeminent color of Lakshmi too, in her form as Karishini or Bhū-Devī. In her form as Śrī-Devī, she's often given the color red. And here is Rangoli designs being painted. You can see a kind of a rudimentary lotus flower here, lotus leaves coming out of the pot, and she's doing this painting with rice paste. Here's another form of the lotus. Again, you can see by this complex of images, the play of life and welcoming Lakshmi, asking her to bless the home with abundance. That Shakti, let it overflow so that it permeates the home and brings about well-being and wealth and abundance. So when we think of abundance, we are thinking of multiplicity, plentitude. It's kind of an exponential aspect. As we saw in the fractals of the tree branches out, and it multiplies. That is abundance. This is kind of conceptualizing all the previous aspects of Lakshmi in the context of the Hindu marriage rite of Saptapadī. Sapta means 7, Padi means steps. So one of the rites that is done during the Hindu marriage is that of Saptapadī. And these rites again come to us from the Vedic period. And they are encoded in one of the 4 Vedas, which is the Atharva Veda. The Atharva Veda has a lot of the rituals laid out in it. So what is done during the Saptapadī is 7 piles of rice is put, and then the bride and the groom walk towards it. Sometimes they both walk together, and sometimes she walks because she symbolizes Lakshmi, and she's led by him because after the marriage, she'll be going to go to his house. So in a way, it's saying, you are the embodiment of Lakshmi, please come to my home. But during the Saptapadī, 7 steps, these are the vows they take together. May we have energy. Let us have the energy of life. May we be blessed together. May we have vigor and strength. That is, may that energy give us the strength to do many things. So let us fulfill our vows together. These are the promises we have made towards each other. Let us use this energy for our well-being and joy. Mayo bhava. So Isha, Urje, Vrata, Mayo bhava. These are the Sanskrit terms for these concepts. And then we move on to Pashu. Pashu literally means animal, but it also means living beings. You see how they are contextualizing themselves and their own happiness in the context of other living beings. And then the next step is for Ritu. May we live in a way that is in consonance with the seasons and the cosmic and cycles. Ritu means seasons, cosmic cycles. And may we finally do rites or hotra for the well-being of all. So when we talk about rites, we mean like actions, rituals that are performed with this intention for the well-being of all. I wanted to bring this out to illustrate how this rite embeds the individuals in the various networks. You become a householder or you enter a home when you marry. So that it's a life cycle ritual. At the beginning of that life stage itself, the vision or the purpose to which they will be living has been laid out to them. And in the context of human culture, the most productive years of a human being is this life stage. When you're fully an adult and the life stage ends when you become old and you're closer to death. So it's a very long period of several decades. They are the contributing members to the society because they are the ones who will take care of the young and the old and the infirm. They will be creating the wealth. They will be creating food. They will be creating knowledge. They will be creating artifacts that is beneficial to the society. That ethos of what the Shakti at this stage of my life, what will I use it for, is laid out in this rite. I wanted to bring this because we can see here how Grha-Lakshmī and Śrī-Devī and Bhū-Devī are connected here. Now we'll segue into understanding living systems itself. Here onwards, I will move more towards the biological sciences and see what science has to tell us about the archetype of life, about what science has to tell us about Devī. Much of what I have told you earlier about living systems I have actually drawn from this book, The Systems View of Life, written by Fritjof Capra and Pierluigi Luisi. They're both systems scientists. They have come together to understand and create this body of knowledge where life systems are understood. Fritjof Capra, interestingly, started his career as a nuclear scientist. And back in the 70s, 80s, he came out with a very famous book called The Tao of Physics. It is one of his first books and it became a huge hit. But now, since the 90s, and especially since in the mid to present 2000, last 20, 30 years, he's done some amazing work in the field of life systems. This is one of his newer books, which basically is a compilation and a distillation of several of his previous books on life systems. I read this book like 4 times, and what I have distilled out of it is these few bullets. Life systems are diverse. That means they're not monocultures. In fact, monoculturing or anything mono is detrimental to life. And these diverse life forms have an interdependent relationships, what is known as symbiotic mutuality. That means they live in ways that are not only interdependent, but that are mutually beneficent and that lead to mutual well-being. So it's not at the cost of one life versus other. It's not that such relationships do not exist. It's just that such relationships do not lead to thriving living systems. Eventually, they lead to diseased living systems. As we see when, let's say, a parasite attacks a plant, eventually it will kill its host. So that kind of symbiotic mutuality is what living systems aim for. And then there are sustainable webs in the sense that there's zero waste. And if there is waste, then the waste of one becomes the food of another, as we saw in cow dung. Cow dung is waste of the cow, but the manure, the dung itself, becomes the host for so many life forms, which in turn lead to further life forms. So these webs of diverse life forms have a way of organizing themselves. It's a kind of a mandala kind of behavior, kind of a kaleidoscopic behavior. You move the kaleidoscope, but then everything rearranges itself into a mandala. It's a new mandala, but they have a way of organizing themselves. That's how living systems evolve. When a new species enters, or there's global warming, or there's cooling, or there's dryness, or there's excess water, whatever it is, there is a reorganization in a way that they go back to sustainability, they go back to interdependency and symbiotic mutuality. Then they're dynamic, and we saw that. We know that. But what I want to emphasize here is within tolerance limits. It's just like our bodies. You know that the beating of the heart creates a dynamic flow of blood in our body. But we also know that certain rates of heartbeats are optimal, or certain blood pressure is optimal. Beyond a certain level of high blood pressure, it becomes detrimental to the body. And beyond a certain lower limit of blood pressure, again, it becomes detrimental. We see that in temperature too. We see that in oxygen or carbon. We see that in water. There's always tolerance limits within which that life form can exist. And beyond it, it can actually lead to infertility or death systems or disease systems. Then these kinds of living systems that are diverse, interdependent, and dynamic are also stable and resilient. It's very interesting that it's diverse systems that are more resilient, and less diverse a system is, the more prone it is to instability and disease and even death. And then these living systems are also open. That means they're responsive to the outside. So we saw that again in this context of embedded chakras. We see that in the context of the Śrī-Yantra too. Each embedment is open to the outside. We see that in life as well. No species is immune to the outside, and it lives in response to the outside, to the ecosystem in which it lives, to the context in which it lives. So when we use the term open, we also mean that it's a continuous learner. If the context changes, its behavior would change. And then living systems are emergent, creative, and multiplicative. This is a special quality of living systems. When we use the term emergent, it means it's not like a guinea pig just going around in the loop doing the same action. It's not that kind of a static dynamism where there's no change. It just breaks out, just like a tree branches out, and new branches, new stems, new birds, new animals, new continuous creativity, and it leads to multiplicative manifestations. So that is why you can see that Lakshmi embodies all this. Her mythos embodies all this. When we use the term plenty, abundance, we are thinking like this. Here's a cute graphic that kind of embodies all this, that imagines all these principles. I use this graphic to show that our cycles are intertwined. No energy, no Shakti is really lost. It's just transforms. It's recomposed. One life dies, another life forms, and these cycles are intertwined. And actually, they're kind of similar. The human life cycle and that of a tree is very similar. It's just that the human life cycle is probably about 80 to 100 years, max 120 years, while that of many trees can span several hundred years. Back to our sense of archetypal complementarities. Here I just wanted to lay out why is it that Lakshmi's complement is Vishnu. As I said earlier, Lakshmi stands for Artha, wealth, meaningful wealth, and growth, plentitude, but in the context of constant change, constant flow of life. And Vishnu, the word itself means that which is all-pervading. But in the context of Lakshmi, he particularly stands for the concept of dharma. Dharma means that which sustains, that which supports. Dharma means that which gives stability and balance. If this is a quality of Lakshmi, its complementarity is growth, and plentitude has to be complemented by support, stability, and balance. Change is complemented by equilibrium and homeostasis. When we use the term homeostasis, we mean the overall stability of the living being. When we use the term living being, you have to think also in terms of ecosystems, cultural systems, that they all maintain their homeostasis. Remember, they're all open systems, so they're open to change because life energy flows. Shakti is flowing all the time, and life can happen only in the context of flow and therefore in the context of change. Living systems then have all these qualities, which I pointed out earlier. But in the context of mythos, Lakshmi is balanced by Vishnu. That context of growth and equilibrium and balance and scalability while maintaining homeostasis is shown in these three sets of images. Scalable fractal networks, the tree. And here's an image of Vishnu flanked by his consort, Lakshmi in her dual aspect. Bhū-Devī, where she's wearing a green sari, and Śrī-Devī, she's here, it is pink, but like pink close to red. And here's modern day imagery, again encompassing the same idea. The mythos again lives on in new art forms. There's Vishnu, a very modern rendering of Vishnu holding Lakshmi's feet. His hands are blue, her body is close to pink, and her body is bejeweled. The luminosity of life in all its forms, just a hint of a lotus flower here. Unmanifest energy, manifest energy, unlimited, coalescing into limited forms, but still pervaded by luminosity, provided we can see it. And here is Śrīnātha, a Pichwai painting. Again, he is Vishnu holding up Lakshmi in the form of a mountain. Śrī, he's holding her up. And there she is in all her life forms. Again, here that blueness, the darkness or the whiteness that we saw in Shiva, it all that connotes that primordial energy. Darkness also has no limits. Light, actually, when you look at the night sky, there's no limit to darkness. The stars are just manifestations in that, spotting the darkness. So we have to think of darkness, the dark, whether it's a dark goddess or the darkness of Shakti as that, the unlimited. But yet that nurtures everything. Here's an embroidery I made for my grandchildren. Again, tree life. I bought this kit at Michael's for I think it was $9.99 with a coupon. That wonderful imagination, the beautiful soul that created this design. I just followed it. It took me about a year to stitch this embroidery. But you can see that. All the life forms together. Sea life, land life, bird life, trees, leaves, all together. Mutual flourishment. There was a different quote here, and I made it more meaningful for my grandchildren. And made it every bird, every bug, every fish, every leaf, every flower, every being, all our family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Kutumbakam means family. Vasudhaiva is all life, the world of life forms. I have a quote here. We must assume that life is a kind of unit, that it is really a continuum and meant to be as it is, namely, all one tissue in which things live through or by means of each other. This is from Carl Jung's work quoted in The Earth Has a Soul, and the book is by Meredith Sabini. It's just a compilation of his nature-based quotes. It's an amazing compilation, and it gives us a sense of his awareness of anima mundi, the luminosity of the earth and all of life. So now we move on to the last phase of our talk, where we can explore what the goddess Devī, primordial Shakti, what she means to us now. Again, from the context of living networks that of intertwined, mutually beneficial ways in which life has evolved on Earth and all beings strive to live. We will keep that in mind as we move through the next set of slides. So sensing our brokenness is where I'm coming from. If life's networks are based on mutual connectivity and flow of energy and mutual beneficence, then we can look at ill health from the perspective of brokenness. We can look at what ails us. We can look at our pathology from the perspective of what's broken. How is it that the Shakti is not flowing, or how it is misused, or how is it being blocked? From that point of view, I will enter into ecological investigations. One of the ways in which human ecological footprint is looked at is global hectare per capita. They basically look at different cultures and what is the global hectare per capita in different cultures. And they look at what is it that we are consuming, what is the rate at which we are consuming. And the global hectare per capita now, average at the global level, is about 2.5. Which means we need 2.5 Earths to live as we do now at a global level. But different cultures have different numbers, like very wealthy but kind of arid nations that cannot make their own food. For example, countries in the Middle East around the Arabian Desert, they have the oil wealth, but they cannot grow their own food because very large, lots of arid land. Then, their GHA per PC is nearly close to 10. In the United States is somewhere in the range of, I think, 6. And India is 0.9. Of course, there are other countries, let's say, where the land is fertile, but their population pressure is not there, like many South American countries. They have even lower numbers. But that is just part of the story, the ecological footprint, the weight that we put on Mother Earth. Another is just the way human systems interact with ecological systems. Remember, ecological systems have zero waste, but we create unprocessable waste. Especially over the last 50, 60 years, we have come up with plastic and foil and tin and all kinds of products. While we are amazed at our ingenuity, but that is just like piling up waste beyond which we do not process it and the earth cannot process it. Then we also have levels of toxicity that, remember, there's tolerance limits within which living systems work. Human activity has created levels of toxicity that is detrimental to living systems, whether it is levels of carbon or levels of nitrogen in soil, in water. Nitrogen in soil is fine, but nitrogen in water isn't. And heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, pesticides, the amount of pesticides in the soil, and fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers. All this is fairly recent. And if you look at ecological data, you'll see that Shakti has taken this turn in human systems fairly recently. Considering agriculture has been around with us, we have been doing agriculture and creating things and trading for more than 10 millennia. That cultural wealth we have created for such a long period that it can be laid to waste in a span of 50 years is truly shocking. Back to the concern with life itself and Lakshmi's quality of engendering life, the biggest threat is infertility. That we will break these systems in such a way that it lead to infertility. We should never ever forget the earth is way older than we are. And the systems that continue to sustain us, microbial systems, the fungal systems, the geochemical systems, they're way, 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 way older than we are. and to upset those cycles with a kind of a brazenness just speaks of our lack of intelligence. Interestingly, Homo sapien means intelligent human, but all this behavior looks like we are being far from intelligent. I didn't want to leave on that kind of a sad, but clearly that is the note we now have. It is our reality, climate change, the loss of fertility, the population pressure, all that is a huge issue for us. Given that problem, I thought, okay, what is the solution? Then I wanted to go back to natural agroecological strategies, something that Neolithic human beings became conscious of, and something succeeding generations have built upon. And now we're going back again to explore all that. And many people have done it all over the world. They're all looking at ecology and economics from a perspective that is more in consonance with Lakshmi's energy. We will continue to be able to grow and thrive together. From that perspective, given our problems with possible toxicity and infertility, we're looking at regeneration specifically. I'm basing here these 8 bullets from having studied these issues from many perspectives from around the world. But one book that started that journey for me was this book, Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. In this book, he is an economist. So he approaches the whole thing from the perspective of money and the commodification. When we say commodification, is putting our values of money, countable money, onto whatever can be quote unquote commodified, be it carbon credits, be it pure water, be it the fertility. I don't know. We haven't yet come to commodifying the fertility of the earth. Maybe we'll get there. But what his argument is that commodification has actually created a separate kind of a wall, has torn the networks of ecology and economics, which were always embedded together, apart. So much so that our economic life became exploitive of ecology. Remember, Śrī-Devī and Bhū-Devī are 2 facets of Lakshmi. It's often like one is being propitiated at the cost of another now. So his main thrust is to decommodify, and basically he's going into what is known as gift economics. But my own emphasis in the rest of this talk is on agriculture, on agroecological strategies. Mainly because I feel that food is finally the main thing. Any creature lives on food. Once we get the food part right, I think the others will probably fall in line. So natural agroecological strategies come under various headings: agroforestry, natural farming, zero budget farming. People who have experimented with all this in Japan, in India, of course, in Africa. And the people that we are most beholden to in this context is Masanobu Fukuoka. He came up with something called pan-straw farming. He came up with agricultural strategies that mimicked forests, different living forms in forests. How do they work together? And how can that be mimicked in agriculture? And in India, that inspired somebody named Subhash Palekar. And he adapted that to Indian circumstances, especially livestock, especially cow-based farming. And he came up with something called zero budget natural farming. But these 2 people are just 2 among many who have contributed to this field. And these are the aspects of regenerative agricultural strategies. Here again, agriculture and agricultural life, our food life is not at the cost of ecological life. So one is crop and livestock are incorporated, that is plant farms and animal farms are integrated. Then there's crop rotation, that especially between cereal and legume. And that is because legumes fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil, while cereals deplete atmospheric nitrogen. So crop rotation is something all human societies have done at some level or the other. Another is agroforestry, which is just like a forest. We layer different plants, trees, climbers, ground cover, shrubs, root vegetables. All these are layered. So imagine in a monoculture, 1 acre, we grew only one kind of crop. In an agroforestry layered type of situation, that 1 acre would have like 7 or 8 different crops growing at the same time, each coming to yield at different times. So there's continuous income for the farmer. Another is composting and cover crops. When we say composting, we mean urine, manure, dead plant matter, all that is composted so that bacteria can decompose the matter and make it available, and that is used to enrich the soil. Another important issue is low or no tillage, to let the earth, just like in the forest, the earth is not tilled. The earth continues to be the perfect substratum for all these various life forms. And apparently, with little or no tillage, that life forms prosper, while tilling, especially heavy tilling, actually kills life and makes the soil more infertile. And then using natural pesticides and natural fertilizers versus synthetic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Then using local varieties that are amenable to local ecosystems. So there's that sense that different species, different varieties of rice have to be inculcated, and the different varieties should be used specifically in line with what is natural to that ecosystem. There are some rice varieties that are more drought tolerant, some do very well in very flooded systems. So those local varieties have evolved accordingly in different parts of the world, and they have to be saved and they have to be used in an amenable way. And then finally, there's the aspect of spiritual agriculture, seeing that our own artisanship as agriculturists in the growing of food, cooking of food, trading of food is a spiritual activity. Again, you see here how the luminosity of Shakti is made to permeate this very ordinary aspect, very mundane aspect of our lives. In this slide, I want to talk about ruminants and why are they important in eco-farming. And I basically coined the term Go-economics. Go means cow in Sanskrit. So Go-nomics is what I'm calling it. Ruminants are not just cattle, sheep, goats, buffalo, deer, elk, giraffes, camels, alpaca, llamas. These are all ruminants. So what exactly is a ruminant? A ruminant is a mammal that has a 4-chambered stomach. And the first of the chambers is called the rumen, and it's the largest chamber. And these ruminants eat vegetable matter, some form of leaves, plants, grass, whatever leaves they can reach out to. I mean, if you're a giraffe, you can eat leaves off a tree. They eat leaves. And why are leaves important? Because the only source of energy the earth has is the sun, and leaves capture that solar energy. That energy that is in the leaf needs to become available to us. And the cow is the intermediary, or the ruminant is the intermediary. What the ruminant does is eats the vegetable matter, and the matter goes into this rumen, which is the largest chamber. It's several gallons big. But then this is the path of the food. It goes into the rumen, comes back into the mouth. The ruminant chews it again. It's called chewing the cud. And then it goes back into the rest of the chambers where the nutrients are absorbed, and then the manure comes out. Why is all this important? What is happening here is the ruminant is a walking compost machine. So what is happening here is the ruminant is part of that ecosystem that is helpful to humans because plant matter is converted into something we can use. Urine has pesticidal qualities and manure has fertilizing qualities. And both help us extract plentitude out of the earth. Another aspect is, just as in our gut systems, a lot of microbes live, so also in the ruminant gut systems, a lot of microbes live. And just like in soil, microbes are necessary to create that right alchemy in which life can prosper, new life can grow. Similarly, microbes are necessary for the food to be broken down and then digested. And then cows give us milk. That milk, as we said earlier, is the next best thing to mother's milk. It is a whole food. So it is no wonder that when you look at prehistoric art, the ruminants are everywhere in some form or the other. I mean, I went to the Museum of Anthropology in Ankara in Turkey, where all the artifacts are laid out in the cultural context, but also in a chronological context. So the earliest of the galleries are in the prehistoric section. Even before you see the mother goddess, that is Kaibile, whose image we saw earlier, what you see are artifacts related to ruminants, the head of cattle, or the horned animal. This is a petroglyph from Algeria, and this is a petroglyph from Sanganakalu. And here are the ruminants that are being yoked to till the earth. Again, this is not machine tilling, this is plow tilling, and it is done minimally. And then human beings have learned to create natural fertilizers and pesticides from certain animals and plants that nature has given us. Here is something called Panchagavya, which is a natural fertilizer. It uses cow products, curd, that is yogurt, cow dung, cow urine, milk, and that milk is made into curd. and then that curd is churned to create butter, and then that butter is heated to create ghee. These are the cow products, and they are mixed with plant products: banana peel, jaggery, grape juice, and tender coconut. All this is fermented together, and then that fermented product is then used as natural fertilizer. It develops resistance in plants, and it allows them to grow more roots and grow fast. Another is the neem tree. This is associated with the goddess Devī. And neem seeds, neem leaves, cow urine are used to create natural pesticides, among other combinations. So what is happening in various aspects of natural farming is that we're going back to what our ancestors knew and did. We're trying to learn from that. And I again want to go back to Neolithic cultures, because it was there that human beings learned to create multiplicity out of the earth, to learn what I would call fertilizing technologies, and the plentifying technologies, the multiplicative technologies. With that, I'll move on back to our thing of mythos. From the perspective of yoga sciences and archetypal, what I'd call it, viewing the world from the perspective of Devi's archetype, we say that as within, so without. Yatha pinde tatha brahmande. That we perceive the world and we interact with the world according to the way we are. Our consciousness and that of the consciousness beyond are intertwined and they are related. When we look at disease or fracturedness, let us look at healing from the point of view of yoga. Yoga means union, relating, and rebuilding connections. So from the limited, separative, egocentric ways of living that we have endangered, especially the last few decades, that is creating so much ecological damage, we can use yoga techniques to go into self-inquiry about how can we do whole making. I have approached the self-inquiry from the perspective of the mythos of life, and especially the science of life, and always keeping in mind that this is the underlying framework, that we are whole, we are full, we are interconnected, and spirit, or the goddess in her ultimate spirit form, Adi-Shakti, Parashakti, permeates everything. We can think of where is the next frontier of consciousness building is that of eco-consciousness and healing the eco-fracturedness, healing the split between economics and ecology, and healing the split between our well-being and that of the well-being of other life forms in which we are situated. That re-mythologizing, I'm calling it eco-love or Bhū-Bhakti. Bhakti means that which is separate or disconnected. The opposite is abhakti. Bhakti is the opposite of abhakti, which is rebuilding connections. You called it Bhū-Bhakti, Bhū being the earth, as in Bhū-Devī. And I picked up all these forms with these various images. I think of the nativity scene in the Christian mythos as an epitome of eco-love. And that is mainly because also the nativity scene came to us from St. Francis of Assisi. He lived in the 1200s. And he now is the patron saint of ecology. But you can see the Christ child being surrounded by ruminants here. The cow, the sheep, maybe goat, another sheep, another cow. And here is Sri Krishna as Gopala. Gopala means one who tends to cows. But the cow here is not the literal cow, but cow as in all life. And you can see ruminants here, the deer and the cow. Again, set in nature. And here we have the setting of a simple cowshed. And next, every time now we do Christmas, we really should think like this. In what way is our economic participation in the Christian celebration of that festival? In what way is it supporting eco-love or not? Interestingly, in the context of Hindu mythology, Lakshmi has a quote-unquote child. Again, we should not anthropomorphize it as the literal child. What we mean is Lakshmi leads to, that Shakti leads to the child Shakti of Kama. Kama is the god of love and relationship. And he's shown with the arrow. He has 5 arrows and they all have 5 flower tips. And his bow is a sugarcane. And his counterpart in Western mythology is Eros. And Eros is shown riding a dolphin. And interestingly, if you look at the dolphin's brain, the dolphin has an excess of what is known as spindle cells in its brain, in its neurobiology. And the spindle cell, among the various kinds of cells that form the neural networks, is a unique cell in the sense that it is just like the bow. And it is a cell that engenders feelings of love and connectivity. They have found out that people who have problems with making relationships, like as in autism, they have fewer spindle cells. While animals, like the dolphin, that seem to have very close to what we would call human intelligence or human emotional intelligence, they seem to have spindle cells as we do. So I just wanted to bring all this in. You see how mythology is not disconnected from science, and often the mythos of cultures may often give us hints as to where we should be doing scientific investigations, so that our scientific mythos may benefit or serve us in ways that are beneficial for all of us. Again, back to the context of Paleolithic images, there is a star of Venus, Venus being the equivalent of Lakshmi in the Hindu context. Only Lakshmi's mythology is well fleshed out in her context of ecology, economics, in the living systems, than is the mythology of Venus. Maybe because we do not know enough about Greco-Roman cultures where that image was birthed, because a lot of the data is either lost or the knowledge systems have broken in the intervening centuries. And here is the ruminant, again from Sanganakallu, and the piles of ash mounds. Here is an image put out by the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization. Again, there's a ruminant, plants, human activity, food, contextualized here in this modern painting from India. With that, I'll end with this quote from the Atharva Veda. Expanding trust, strict adherence to cosmic order, consecration, austerity, and sacrifice sustain the earth. May the earth, the mistress of what is and what will be for us, make our world wide and increase the extent of what we perceive. In this case, increase the extent of what we bring to consciousness. So with that, I will close my presentation with one more last slide to Durga, Devī, in her form as Durga especially. Durga means fortress. And I wanted to connect that idea of the fortress to one of the last folios in Jung's Red Book. This is often called the castle, but you can see the fortress here. And you can think of the biosphere as a fortress that the goddess has built for us, within which we can live. And here's her hibiscus. Remember, it relates to all those 5 energies that transform consciousness in the biosphere, transform Shakti in the biosphere. And this is the neem leaves, and they are used to worship her feet. And we are all at her feet. Let us never forget that. With that, I'll close my presentation with closing chants, and then we will have more questions. Om. 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 Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. What this Vedic chant says is, that is a whole, this is whole. When what is taken away from the whole, when a whole is taken away from the whole, what remains is the whole. So we can close our segment by meditating on this puzzle of a chant. Hari Om.
Thank you so much for your beautiful, beautiful presentation. So I want to close out the second part of your presentation with a few more questions that will hopefully foster more questions for other people. Let's see. In the title of your presentation, right, is Devī as archetypal life. And the way that you talk about it is how Lakshmi manifests herself as earth, the culture and economy, and then Grha. And so as I was going through this, I was kind of thinking about where Saraswati and Parvati fit into this structure. And so I don't know if you've thought about that too, where they would fit into this Devī worldview.
Well, I believe in the first part of the lecture where I go into the general Devī archetype, there is, I believe, an image with Parvati, Lakshmi, and Saraswati. And I have addressed them after I spoke about the 5 archetypal processes. That is Srishti, Sthiti, Samhara, Tirobhava, and Anugraha. From the perspective of those archetypal processes, the archetypes of Parvati relate to nature. The archetype of Saraswati relates to, she's a goddess of art and poetry and music. But her name means one who reveals to you your own true essence. That's why she is also often shown as a resident deity of the Muladhara chakra. That's the chakra of the individual, where the ego is going from a limited state of consciousness to higher states, and it's extending its boundaries of knowledge. So Saraswati is the guiding force there, as all creative activity leading to an understanding of our fundamental unity. The triple goddesses here is not only about Srishti, Sthiti, and Samhara, that is creation, maintenance, and dissolution. But in their particular tripleness, they are about Lakshmi is the life as we know, Parvati as nature, the primordial nature, but Saraswati as us creating our knowledge networks and semantic networks, and how we populate our mythic ecosystem. And it is she we propitiate for all that.
Thank you for elaborating on that. So I think the next question is about the kind of everyday practicality of what we've talked about to your presentation. So how can the average person integrate and live Devī as the archetype of life in their life day to day? Is it merely recognizing that she's in us and around us, that we're living within this archetype, or are there actual practical things people can do?
Clearly, first is the cultivation of what I would call Devī consciousness, because consciousness relates to one inculcation of our own egos, in the sense of what is it that we are aware of. Extending those boundaries, those ego boundaries, would help. Just as if you have a pet, you have a dog, your network of love. Imagine if that kind of love has to be inculcated for all living beings. That is the final goal. But what can we do in our own little lives? I would say invest in love, and beauty. They go together. And attention. Give attention to what is close to you. I find also going to forests, or if there are any places near you where nature has not been disturbed, I think that those are great places to reflect on how nature operates. And then you can see how much we have distorted. In the sense that we've not been good citizens in the larger web of life. Clearly, I'm not being heroic in the sense that we have to do something about plastics or pesticides. And clearly that needs to be done.
Right.
It's just that I'm just saying, this is the small things you can do in your little life. I know there are many who are doing much more. And of course, those who are like you, we can support you.
I love this idea of focusing and cultivating love, because that changes your perception of
Yes.
And then I think by changing your beingness, you change your doingness.
Yes. We don't think twice about eating beef, for example. But then I know of families where, just as we have cats and dogs, they have cows in their homes. They have these deep connections with the animals. You can see that in the American Indian ethos too. Right. It's not that they did not eat animals, but they only took what they needed and they saw it as a gift that Mother Nature was nurturing them. It's a different perspective on that which has given itself to nurture you.
And there's this concept, I think, around many of the American Indians that these are all of our relations.
Right.
And so I have respect and reciprocity for this life, and for this life giving its life for me.
But with any change by both love and intellectual analysis, what I discovered as I prepared myself for presenting for you was the whole ecological dynamics and footprints that I was not aware of. And from that perspective, if that appeals to those who are scientifically minded, who are more intellectual, there's ample data that conscious consumption and decommodification is the way to go. Technically, Lakshmi is both Mother Earth and wealth, human wealth. But we have created a very huge dissonance in her energies, in the sense that we have more wealth, but it has led to less of a life. So there's something wrong here.
Right.
Because clearly she is both. She's both Śrī-Devī and Bhū-Devī. But it seems like there's something wrong in the way our economic and semantic networks work, that they are being populated in a way that is at odds with our ecological networks and even in our own human networks within our families. For many families, making a living seems to be at the cost of their family life. For the very children and spouses and homes and gardens that they would want to tend to. So it's something to think about. I just want to reflect on my grandmother, my mother's mother. She was a Gandhian, and Mahatma Gandhi's big push in terms of Indian independence was decommodification, about non-consumption, and also what Jung would call going back to the archetypal man, where the artisanship of a product was very embedded in the community. Mahatma Gandhi advocated for homespun fabrics, wearing homespun fabrics, which is called khadi, and my grandparents, both of them, wore khadi. And my grandmother especially was very particular about having even that at a minimal level in terms of what she owned. She only had 2 saris at any given time. And then she had one more that she would wear when she had to go out. These 2 saris, she wore one and she washed the other, and she wore that one the following day. She alternated between these 2. And she also had an amazingly verdant garden, considering that she lived in a city. The small space, she had 2 mango trees, 3 coconut trees, and a very verdant garden that she could literally live off with flowers and fruits. It was a magical place. Only now I realize why it was that I loved being there. But to let other creatures live, we have to, quote unquote, live less, consume in a way that is amenable to other lives. When Jung reflected on the tragedy of the modern man, to a large extent, he was pointing to that. And if you had to go to Basel, where he grew up in Switzerland, you would see that the archaic life was very evident in the way the city is. It's a kind of a fortress type of city. It's a medieval city, and it is filled with beautiful art and also communal water fountains, among other things. And because it's elevated, you have a view of the city and nature around you. And the river Rhine flows by Basel. It's the only quote-unquote port. Otherwise, Switzerland is landlocked. You can imagine the kind of awareness you would have if you had to live there, that your civilization, your current culture stands on the shoulders of previous generations. I think if with that kind of awareness, one is it inculcates gratitude in us. And another, we are less prone to destroy what previous generations have built on. Zurich, on the other hand, where he lived, is a new city. But then he built his stone home in Bullingen, where he truly lived like an archaic man, where he had no electricity or pumped water. And where he painted on the walls.
We have already kind of broached this subject. In the West, we're a highly individualized culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now, especially, we're seeing the contrast between individualism, hyper-individualism, and collectivism, or the lack of collectivism. And by collectivism, I really mean community and interdependence and reciprocity. And it seems to me that those two ways of being need some kind of balance. There needs to be a balance between the individual and the ego, and the individual within the collective society or the community. And what you shared in your presentation clearly outlines the principles of the collectivism, really, that's inherent within Hindu culture. Collectivism might not be the word that you use, but the interdependence, the interconnectedness, that even in this something as simple as the marriage rite, it's not just about the two individuals getting married, it's about the family and the community too, and the maintenance of and the life giving of that. So I'm wondering if we can just talk a little bit more about that, and if you have any insights into how we can bring that maybe into Western culture more, or the effect of us not really having a strong sense of community in that way.
I want to state that no culture can really survive in a context of hyper-individualism. It cannot. It'll lose balance. It'll finally fall apart because such an attitude is unsustainable, even from a cultural point of view. From that perspective, I think we can reflect on what it is in Western culture that we can identify as coming as a balance to hyper-individualism. And one especially is the concept of love. It is something that is well fleshed out in Western culture. And we wish it could be as strong as it used to be a few generations ago in terms of family life and all that. But it still runs strongly in our veins because we do have a very strong commitment to justice in terms of our collectivity. We volunteer. Volunteering is clearly half our economy. And we form, so many non-profit organizations, and we are constantly looking to where we can give. We pay our taxes, we take part in democracy so that we believe in good governance. And why is that? It's for the well-being of all, right? At an ultimate level. Of course, there are things that we do less of, that is probably militarism and the culture of violence that is also there in our media and also in our lives. But the thing is, in America, we've been a pioneer nation. We've had to leave our families and go to new lands. And there we've had to form new communities. By that token, it's not uncommon for us to be more nuclear-centric than a collective family type of centric. I would also think, though, that another aspect of love is being aware of nurturance. So there's an aspect of love where we can totally inflate each other's ego. And we have to be aware that we do not do too much of that, where we foster someone else's individuality by fostering their uniqueness, and that can have a way of fostering their aloneness. That may not be our intention, but that can happen. One way to foster love but not go off the edge with individuality is to look at love in the context of mutual nurturance. One of the ways they do this, and for example, even in a Hindu wedding, one of the last celebratory things is a meal, right? After the marriage, the bride and the groom feed each other. The idea is that we will prosper together by feeding each other, as in mutual nurturance. That way, imagine you had to think of your spouse or your parent, or even as your child, your pet, or your plants, your garden, your home, even your boss. Instead of thinking how you need to feed me, think about how we can feed each other. Or you need to foster me, or I deserve a raise. It's I deserve my rights. But imagine you had to think in the context of mutual rights and mutual responsibilities. I think another thing that has been, in a way, a tragedy for the West is the way modernity has allowed us to become independent. It's a tragedy of sorts, because the more independent we become, the less interdependent we become. It's through interdependence that the ego learns to not isolate itself and become permeable and open and partake in the give and take of life.
And I think that's how individuation happens, is in relationship with life.
Right. And those are the very qualities the ego needs in its relationship to the self. It has to be open and permeable. That sense of being openness is what we need in the ego, because it needs to be permeable and it needs to be open, that it is being nurtured by the self and the unconscious. In our day-to-day interactions with others, it will be good if we can be aware that how are we nurturing each other's egos? Are we making them egocentric, or are we helping them become individuated? Again, from that context, when we think about the divine feminine from the perspective of nurturance, that we are being nurtured at all these levels that I spoke about in the talk. Clearly, we are being nurtured by Earth, Mother Earth. If anything has to put the ego in its context, it's that.
Every time I think about people talking about colonizing and living on Mars, I always go, but we're not indigenous to Mars. Our bodies are indigenous to Earth. We are her body.
Yes.
How could we even live there? That's not our body.
Yeah.
So I guess I just have this question about the body, where the body fits in the schema of Bhū-Devī, Śrī-Lakshmī as culture and economy, and then Grha-Lakshmī. Where does the body as home fit in?
The body, I didn't talk about what is known as the 5 elements. Remember the fineness of the goddess? There's a term called Panchabhuta. Pancha means 5, Bhuta means elements. And those are air, water, earth, fire, and space. In the Western Greek context, there are only 4. There's air, water, earth, and fire. But in the Eastern context, there's 5. The Panchabhuta is what everything is made up of, microcosm or macrocosm. They are entities that are the foundation of atoms. From that context, how does the body fit in? Atma, which is a self, is the same as the macrocosmic self, which is Paramatma. Both from a body point of view, in terms of the Panchabhutas, we are made of the same elements. I mean, scientifically, we can say that too. Our gut has so many microbial organisms. We can't even digest our food without them, and we breathe air and we drink water. We are all connected. That way, there's no sense of my body is no different from any other body that is embedded in the ecosystem. Yet, it is a differentiated whole, a differentiated fractal, whole on, just like everything else. But from the perspective of the self within is no different from the self without. So when we even do namaste, that's exactly what we mean. I and you are the same in the self, and I bow down to the self in you. And when you do namaste to me, you would say, I bow down to the self in you. There's a mutual recognition that we are connected. We share the self that way. Atma and Paramatma, as in the macrocosmic self, are seen as the same, as an Atma and Brahman are the same. It's again a fractal consciousness, I just assume that we would know that our bodies are just like any other bodies in the ecosystem. They have their own dharma, because every species has its own dharma. And as I pointed out in my talk, the human species is different because they have a certain amount of Shakti that is not dictated by nature. And that is the Shakti that has allowed human beings to create culture. And up till now, that culture has not been detrimental to the earth. It's only now it has become detrimental. Most we have fought wars, but we have not created waste that the earth cannot digest, and waste that is detrimental to our fertility and that of others, our health and that of others.
Yeah, it's so massive right now.
It's so massive, yes. So what can we do on our own? And I said, love more. It seems so small. Clearly, we need to do what Mahatma Gandhi advocated for, that we consume consciously.
It's existential. I mean,
yes.
Our survival depends on us.
Right.
Right. I wanted to ask you something about semantic networks. I think it's so important, especially as mythologists, for example, when we're thinking about and talking about other cultures, analyzing them. It's so easy to project our own images and ideas onto that other culture to analyze that culture.
Semantic networks means networks of meaning. The term itself comes from Fritjof Capra's book. I have just used that same term. It is a way to understand how human cultures work. But in the context of Lakshmi, she is the Shakti of Artha. Artha means that which is meaningful, that which is valuable, in a sense that it is beneficial. For example, let's use a bag of organic spinach in a plastic bag. At one level, it is beneficial because it's a great way to package. You can see the product and it keeps the spinach fresh. But at another level, it is detrimental because it is a waste we cannot process. You can see how that semantic networks affect economic networks. If you have not given meaningfulness to non-human entities in your ecosystem, then you come up with economic ways of being that are actually detrimental because your semantic network is inadequate, or it is biased, or it is way too what we would call anthropocentric. From the perspective of our myth studies, and we do this in Pacifica, we do unpack the semantic networks that frame Western consciousness. We do that. But to an extent, we are also limited in the biases of our modernity, right? And we wouldn't be aware about the ecosystem of meanings that we live in. It is natural. It requires a lot of deconstruction to unpack how our semantic networks affect the ways in which we frame our lives. And language itself is inadequate because when we use the term unmanifest to manifest, what we are also saying what is limitless is becoming limited. Anything that we bring into consciousness through language, through symbol, through any cultural artifact for us to understand, we should not concretize it, and we should allow it to dissolve, because it's just something, just like when you hold a handrail to climb up. Anything we create for our semantic networks and language, we have to be very aware that we have to allow it to dissolve. That very dissolution, one, helps us understand or be open to a semantic network that's different from ours. And at another level, it helps us be always aware that any semantic network, anything that is in the cultural ethos, its mythos, that's in the imaginal ecosystem, is a way to hold. And you need something to hold because the ego needs to understand. But it's only when you allow it to go, you're open to a deeper network. That's why in the Hindu mythic system, the self-archetype is also argued from the perspective of nirguna, nirakara. That means formless, qualityless. And it is described only in terms of negation, not in the positive way of life, shakti, prana, or rasa or raga, that we have formulated in my talk here. Ultimately, Devi also is described in her Parashakti form as Nirguna. Kali, that's why she's black, because that is beyond any limitation. I think this is something that probably somebody who's from the sciences, especially if you are from the physical sciences and you're aware of physics and stuff like that, then you would have developed this kind of a consciousness. To a large extent, our self-archetype in our culture is that of the embodied human, It is natural then our tendency towards anthropocentrism is fairly strong, and anthropo-exclusivity. That kind of exceptionalness.
Yeah. If dogs or ants or other creatures had the desire to create their own God images, would they put them in their own?
Right.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of depth psychology, it is also true that self-archetype takes on imagos that are closer to the ego's image so that it can befriend. We also have to be cognizant of the fact that the images that psyche presents us with, or the imagos that psyche presents us with, is because psyche is trying to speak our language. And why? Because she loves us. Because she wants to communicate to us in a way we understand and we can relate. It is her grace that she's limiting herself to our little particularity. We should never forget that.
Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close up here?
I want to add that we are at a cusp of a collective human consciousness, and there's a new thing that's waiting to be born. There's an awareness that as human beings, our consciousness, our mythos is somewhat diseased, that we need to refertilize it with more enduring images, more enduring stories. And I think it's happening. I see it all around me. Let us nurture that which wants to be born all around us. With that, we'll do our closing prayer.
Yes.
Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Again, Anna, thank you for inviting me and having me present for your channel. Wishing you all the best, and wishing your subscribers and those who listen to what you have to offer all the best. May we all prosper together.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your love, and for teaching us Devī consciousness. Devī consciousness. Thank you. And really quickly, for everyone at home, if you like this video, please hit like, please subscribe, and please share this video with your friends. The more we get the message out of Devī consciousness to the world, the quicker we can move toward healing and regeneration. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Ciao.